Hello and welcome. This is Jennifer. I am so sorry that I disappeared for a few weeks there. My son had a really scary eye infection. All is well now, but I took some time off during that, and then I did some traveling to see friends and my father-in-law. But now I'm back and I'm filming lots of videos, so I have a lot to share over the next few weeks. Now today is all about using your Coverplate dies creatively. Now Coverplate dies include any kind of background die that either creates a pierced pattern or cuts holes. So any background die would work for these techniques. I think it's really important to find new ways to use your Coverplate dies since their price point is higher because they are bigger dies. I have lots of different examples and techniques for you today, and I will link to other videos that show more on each of the techniques. All right, let's first start by creating this floral element that I'll use on several of my cards. This features the new Pinkfresh Studio Simple Gestures collection. Now in this collection there is a stamp set, hot foil plate, coordinating stencils, and dies. These are all sold separately, so you can pick and choose the pieces that you like. Because I like to hot foil, I chose to use the hot foil plate today, but you could use the stamp set instead if you prefer or if you don't have a hot foil machine. I like that these layering stencils provide coloring for that floral image, but also have different words that you can stencil, and the coordinating dies are available for those. This is a fun option because it allows you to get more from these stencils and dies. Again, these are all sold separately, so you can pick and choose how you like, and I love that Pinkfresh does this. I'm starting by hot foiling that floral image several times for my first few cards. I'm using my Spellbinder's Glimmer machine, which allows me to do hot foil. I've allowed my foil machine to warm up, and I'll place the plate onto the hot portion, that gray area in the middle. I will then lay a piece of glimmer foil right on top, pretty side down. Then a piece of smooth white cardstock. I like Hammer Mill, which I'll link below, but you could use any cardstock you have. I will then add my 2 plates that come with the machine and press the timer button. Now the timer button will go for a bit. Once it stops flashing, I can take all of those plates out and run it through my Spellbinder's Platinum machine, which is a die cut machine. Now these two machines work well together. If you have a different die cut machine, you'll need to check to see which hot foil machine is compatible with that die cut machine. This one works well with the Spellbinder's Platinum or the Big Shot. All right, now after I ran that through to apply the pressure, I can peel off the foil and look at that beautiful foiled image. So the Glimmer machine provides the heat, the die cut machine applies the pressure, and that is what creates this gorgeous foiled image. On that last example, I used a pewter colored foil. This time I'm using an iridescent gold and repeating the process the same way. If you're looking for a more in-depth video tutorial on this process, I'll link to a video up here on the top right. So when the timer went off, I took all the plates out and ran it through my Platinum machine, and look at that beautiful gold foil. However, I still have this leftover piece of foil, that negative piece that I don't want to go to waste. So I have my Pinkfresh Studio solid hot foil plate, and I put that onto my Glimmer machine. I'm laying that leftover piece of foil pretty side down onto the hot foil plate, then another piece of the smooth cardstock on top of that, then the 2 plates that we always use with our Glimmer machine. I then will press the little timer button to allow it to heat up. However, I do like to give it a little bit of extra time, a couple extra minutes when I'm using that solid hot foil plate. Then I will take all the plates out and run it through my die cut machine back and forth twice. That way I can be sure to apply a lot of pressure to this since it's such a large area. Now we have used that leftover piece to create another image. This is a reverse image. So the outline of the flowers is white and it's foil all around that. Now I'm using my coordinating die to cut this out along with the other pieces we created. So that solid hot foil plate is very helpful in making sure you don't let any of your foil go to waste. You can get a reverse image very easily. Here's another where I used that leftover pewter foil and got this reverse image. You'll see me use these foiled floral pieces for my first few cards in this video. All right, let's get started on some cards. For this first one, I want to take one of my foiled outline floral images and add some coloring. You could use colored pencils, markers, watercolor. I prefer to use the layering stencils that are available because that's a huge time saver for me. I put my foiled piece onto a Brutus Monroe stamp and stick mat, which will just hold it in place. I then took the first stencil and lined it up, and the sticky mat holds that too. And I'm applying ink over the openings using a blending brush and Pinkfresh Studio dye ink. Now I'm not going to show this whole process because it's very simple. You just line up the stencils and apply ink over the opening. And before you know it, you have a beautiful colored image, and it has the foil outline to it. If you're interested in learning more about inking over stencils and kind of stepping up the results that you get, I'll link to a video up here on the top right. I'm a big fan of layering stencils to color in images because it's a big time saver, as I mentioned, and I enjoy using ink over markers, pencils, or whatever. Now we can use the coordinating die to cut that piece out, and it's ready to add onto our card design. Since I like to have dimension on my card, I die cut 3 additional die cuts from white cardstock, and I'm gluing those together behind our inked piece. This just gives it some nice stacked dimension that will hold up nicely through the mail, but you could skip this if you prefer. Okay, now it's time to get into those background or cover plate die techniques. The first is to create a see-through card front. Now I've shown this in videos many times, but I think it's definitely one of the best techniques to do with your background dies. So I'm starting with a piece of cardstock that is 8.5 by 11 inches, and I'm scoring right down the middle at 5.5 inches. I then can fold along that score line and reinforce it with my bone folder. Now I'll cut that piece that is folded in half at 4.25 inches. Now I have 2 top folding note cards that are 4.25 by 5.5 inches. That's how I create most of my card bases. On this card, I'm using the new Pinkfresh Studio Floral and Diamond Tiles cover plate. Now this is great because it creates little holes and a pierced pattern. Also, it doesn't have an outside cutting edge. So you can tape it directly on the front of your note card, run it through your die cut machine, and it will add the little holes and piercing pattern, but not cut around the edge. So you can do this on a folded note card. I love dies that don't have that outside cutting edge because you have this option of easily cutting it on the front of a folded card, or you can cut your cardstock to whatever size you want. And check that out. Such a fun note card design. You could leave this at 4.25 by 5.5 inches, but I decided to trim mine to be a little narrow because I want some elements hanging off of my card today. Totally up to you how you do it. Next, I have the Pinkfresh Studio Blanket Stitch Square Essentials die set. Now this cuts squares with that little blanket stitch detail to it, which I think adds a little bit of interest. I cut one of those squares from white cardstock, and I'm gluing that at an angle on my card so it looks like a diamond. And notice that this is hanging off the card. If you left your card at 4.25 inches wide, this would fit nicely. I just thought it was fun to have it hanging off. Now I'm going to flip this over, and on the inside of the card, I'm gluing another one of those squares just to give it a nice finished look when you open up the card. I then have a third square that I cut with that Pinkfresh Studio die. I'm putting glue on that, then lining it up with the square we've already done, but the glue is facing up towards the camera. Then I close the card on that, which grabs that square, and now we have a square on the inside of our card where we can write our personal message and it won't show through those holes to the front of the card. I love creating card fronts like this with background dies that is see-through, but there is that area in the center that is solid so we can hide whatever we want to write inside. I then added the floral element onto the square. At this point, I changed my mind about the inside. I decided I didn't want those corners to be cut off on the side. Instead, I wanted them to stick out like the front of the card. So I just glued another solid square on top of it, just to change that look without starting over. Now for sentiment, I use this Pinkfresh Studio Just a Hello floral stamp set. and coordinating die. There are layering stencils for the floral image too, but I'm just using this big image that has lots of sentiments on it. And you can stamp all of the sentiments at once and then use the die to cut them all out at once. I've used this stamp and die set many times in videos. It's a favorite of mine. Here I'm stamping it with Versamark ink and then adding Ranger Liquid Platinum Embossing Powder, which is kind of a darker silver. It's beautiful, like a pewter look. I haven't used it in a while. It used to be a favorite of mine, and I'm glad I remembered to use it because I love the final result. It stands out a little bit darker than a traditional silver. So once I've heat set that, I can use the coordinating die to cut that out, and I have lots of sentiments to use on this card and on future cards. Now I finished this card off screen, but it was simple. All I did was add that sentiment to the center of our floral bouquet, and then I also added some silver gemstones for a bit of sparkle. But this shows you how you can use a cover plate or background die to create a see-through card front. By creating that solid square area in the middle, I can be sure that I can still write a message inside, but not allow it to show through the holes. But having those holes around that square area creates something extra special that most cards don't offer. So this is one of the best ways to use your cover plate or background dies. All right, let's move on to another example. This one also has a see-through card front, but this time I used a cover plate die to both cut and dry emboss, which really steps up your background and offers a lot of detail. Now to dry emboss or make an impression with a cover plate or background die, you need a flexible mat like this one. This is the embossing mat that comes with this Spellbinders Platinum 6. Most die cut machines come with some sort of flexible mat for making an impression or dry embossing. Now I'm going to freeze the screen here and apologize because I had some corrupt footage, so I couldn't share with you the process, but I want to tell you what I've already done here. I used the Pinkfresh Studio Floral Grid Cover Plate background die, and I cut it from the front of a note card just like I did on the last example. Now we're going to step it up after cutting it, and we're going to make an impression with the same die, but we're going to shift the die over a little bit. So I have the die lined up here, shifted over a little bit, and laying it onto that flexible embossing mat, that tan mat. I'll now run this through my die cut machine with the embossing plate. All die cut machines can do this. You just need to follow the instructions with your machine to do dry embossing or to make an impression with a die. Then when I run it through, you'll see I have this beautiful background with the cut holes and the impression made in between. It's such a great way to step up your background. Now notice that the left side edge there didn't have the impression because we had to shift it over a bit. So I'm just kind of popping it in place into the impression we've already done, but shifted to the other side, running that through. And now the front of our card will have both the cut and the impression. This is such a fast and easy way to step up your backgrounds because you have the cut and the embossing, and it works well with any background dies that have a repeated pattern like this one or the others I'm using today. Now, since there are holes on the front of this card, we need to create a solid spot that we can put on the front of the card and the inside to hide our personal message. This time I'm using the Pinkfresh Studio Diagonal Stitch Circle dies, and I cut those from white cardstock. Here I'm gluing two together and then a peach color cardstock circle that's slightly bigger, and this will go on the front of our card. So I'm putting glue on the back of that and gluing that right to the front. I cut another white stitch circle and I'm gluing that to the other side of the front of the card. You could skip this if you want, but I think it gives a nice finished look. Now for the circle that will be glued on the inside where we can write our personal message, I thought it'd be fun to do a foiled circle. So I have the Pinkfresh Studio Nested Circles hot foil plates and coordinating dies. I've used these in a video before. I'll link to that in the top right. I have one of the circle hot foil plates and I have it on my glimmer machine. And this time I have like a rose gold foil that's just beautiful. Lay that pretty side down on the foil plate and a piece of white cardstock on top of it and our two shims. I'll press the timer button. When it's done, I'll take all those plates out and run it through my die cut machine to add some pressure and look at that beautiful rose gold foil circle. Now I don't use it in this video, but remember you can use that leftover foil with that solid hot foil plate to get a reverse image if you want to. Now I'm using a circle to cut out that hot foil circle so it has a nice trim to it. So I'm putting glue on the back of that circle die cut, lining it up with the circle on the front inside of the card. Then I'll close my card onto it, and now we have that foil circle where we'll write our personal message on the inside. Now here I have one of our reverse foil images that I showed you earlier in this video, and I'm gluing that right in the center of the circle. Remember, this element was created by using the leftover foil along with the solid hot foil plate. So here's the completed card. You can see that foil circle where we can write our personal message on the inside. Just add some fun to the inside of the card too. You have the foiled image, reverse image on the outside. We have the holes cut in our background along with the impression, and I added some pink pearls to the center of the pattern. I also white heat embossed the Hope All Is Well from that Just a Hello stamp set that I showed you earlier, and added that right to the center. So this technique is to both cut with your background die and dry emboss or make an impression with it to really step up the details in your background. All right, now let's go to a next technique, and that is to use one of your regular cover plate or background dies to create a foiled background. Yes, you can use dies with your foil machine. You don't have to use hot foil plates. Here I have the Pinkfresh Studio Floral Tiles Cover Plate Background Die. This just creates a pierce pattern that is beautiful, but here, instead of doing piercing, I'm going to do foiling. I'm creating a hinge with a piece of tape between my cover plate and a piece of cardstock. I find this helpful when I'm foiling. I'm taking a piece of foil, making the pretty side touch the cover plate, and kind of closing the cardstock around that. I then put that onto my glimmer machine with the plate touching the hot surface, and just taping it there so it doesn't shift. I then put my plates on top of that, press the timer button, and allow it to heat as if I was doing a regular hot foil plate. Now I'm running it back and forth through my die cut machine, removing the foil, and look at that fine detailed foil that we get. So anywhere that would normally cut, we have a foil image. You can do this with any of your background dies. Remember, you can use that negative space of foil for a reverse image if you want. I repeated this process on 2 other shades of kind of a purplish pink cardstock, so we have 3 pieces in total. I want to create this background with the darker colors towards the center. All the pieces are foiled. So I have one of the darker pieces, and I'm just kind of following the foiled pattern in the background and cutting out a middle section from those. That way I can glue these pieces together onto our full pink foiled background, and we can have a continuous foiled pattern along each of the pieces. So here we have our darkest purple that I'm gluing in the center of our medium purple, and then we'll glue that on the pink. Now that darkest purple in the center looks kind of splotchy. That was because I inked that piece to be a bit darker because I couldn't find cardstock that I wanted in that color. It will smooth out as that ink dries. So now we have a continuous foil background across that, all created with a background die. Now I have trimmed that down, and I'm gluing it onto a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch top folding white note card. And I have one of my floral images that I created earlier in this video, this time with the pewter reverse image. So this was created with the leftover pewter foil. Glued that in the center. All we need is a sentiment, so I'm using the Pinkfresh Studio Fancy Script Word Hot Foil Plates and coordinating dies. So I foiled thanks, and I did that in the pewter foil, and then I used the coordinating die to cut it out. You can see I did hello also. Might as well do more than one at a time, and I'll save that for later. I'll use the thanks for this card and glue it right in the center of our floral bouquet. I did also add some soft pink pearls kind of scattered around our foiled image. So on this card we have foiling on our sentiment, that floral image, and our background. The background is very detailed and very intricate because we used a die to do the foiling. You can use any die that you have to do foiling. It will just create that fine line look, which I think is beautiful on a background. All right, another way to use your cover plates or background dies is to do raised inking. This is super fast, super easy, and can really change up the look of your backgrounds. Here I have a piece of peach cardstock, and I'm using a baby wipe just to add a little bit of moisture to that cardstock. You could spray it with water if you prefer. This will just help to prevent from cracking when we do the embossing. Now I have a cover plate die that I am temporarily taping onto that cardstock. I have my embossing mat in my die cut machine, which will allow me to make an impression with this die instead of cutting with it. So I'm putting my embossing plate on top, running that through, and now we have that beautiful impression. Notice the front and the back look very different, so you could use whichever side you want. We're going to step this up and enhance that texture by adding ink to the raised area. So I put my cardstock piece onto a sticky mat just to hold it still. I have a Tim Holtz brayer and some white pigment ink, and I'm rolling that over the raised areas of this cardstock. I'm using white because I think it looks nice, but you could use a darker ink, a different color ink, whatever you want. Then when you take a closer look, look at how this looks completely different. I created this with a die. Now let's create another background, but this time I'm applying ink over the back of it. So it's going to look different when the ink is on the raised areas. Remember, you can do this with any cover plate or background die. You could even do this on backgrounds where you used an embossing folder. All right, so here is a comparison with the white ink added to the raised areas of the back and the front. Look at how it gives completely different results, allowing you to get more from your cover plates. So I'm using the background on the right for my card example. I trimmed it down and added it onto a top folding white note card that is 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. And here I have a gold foil floral image from earlier where I added some inking with the coordinating stencils. I also have a leftover sentiment from earlier in that liquid platinum embossing powder, and I'm gluing that right on top. Since I have something hanging off this card, I need to use a slightly larger envelope, so I have an A6 envelope, and I'll link to the source for that below. I also added some white pearls here and there for a little bit of dimension. I love the texture on that background. But when I was looking at this, I felt like I needed some darker color towards the center of the flowers. I could have done that with ink earlier. I thought I wanted to go softer in colors, but I changed my mind. So I'm just coming in with some marker and adding some darker color towards the center of the flowers just to make it pop. This is something you don't have to do, but I find if I feel like my image is kind of flat looking, by adding a little bit of dark color to the nooks and crannies, you can really make it pop more. So here is the final result, and check out the background of that. I created that with a cover plate or background die, and it works with any background die you may have. Okay, my next idea for using a background die or cover plate is to do an inked dry emboss. This is kind of the opposite of what we just did. Instead of putting ink on the raised areas, we're putting ink on the embossed or impression areas. For this, I'm using the Pinkfresh Studio Blooming Vines collection. This has a background stamp, a coordinating die, and coordinating stencils. I gold heat embossed that background stamp onto white cardstock, and I'm putting that onto my sticky mat, and then I will add coloring with the coordinating stencils. Now I'm just applying ink over the stencils, so I'm not going to show that in the video, but after I'm done, look at this beautiful result that we get. Now you could leave this as is, or you can use the coordinating die to cut all the different pieces out. You end up with a bunch of individual pieces that you can arrange how you want or put on multiple cards, or you can just arrange them back into their original position on a card and use them that way. I decided just to use a few of the images on my card and save the rest for later. Next, let's do the technique, and it's on the white rectangle there in the center. I have my die cut machine with that embossing mat. And I have a piece of white cardstock, and we'll use a baby wipe just to add a little moisture so we don't have cracking in the paper. And I'll put that onto the embossing mat so it's ready to go. Next, I have the new Pinkfresh Studio Floral Tiles cover plate die that I used on an example earlier. And I have a brayer and Pinkfresh Studio dye ink. I'm applying ink to the raised areas of this die. So it's just putting ink on the raised areas, not on the background of the die. And the brayer is the best way to do this. You could go direct with the ink pad onto the raised areas if you prefer. Totally up to you. I then carefully lay that onto my white cardstock, put the embossing plate on top, run it through my die cut machine, and when it comes out, the ink will be in the little valleys that die made, the impression that die made. Now you'll notice I got a few ink splotches here and there, but that ink is really only on the surface, only a little bit of ink transferred, so I can easily scratch that away, which you'll see me do a little bit later, or I can cover it up. This is a great way to use your background die. Next, I have another technique on this card, and that is to do a pressed piercing, which I did on the blue note card background. Now, this is where you not only cut with your piercing cover plate, but you also make an impression. So this is a cover plate that doesn't cut holes, it just does a piercing pattern. I'm taping it onto the front of a note card and running it through my die cut machine as I would with any die, which cuts that piercing pattern. It makes little slits or little poked holes into the cardstock. Now I'm keeping the note card taped onto the die and I'm running it through my die cut machine with that embossing mat, which really presses those raised areas into the cardstock, making that pattern stand out much more than if you just cut with the cover plate. So now I'm using those two pieces together. We have our inked impression, that white piece, that I trimmed down and matted on a dark teal colored cardstock, and then I glued that to the center of our impressed note card. I glued my elements to the center of that and realized some of the ink was still showing. So I'm using a paper sander to kind of erase that ink that I got when I did the technique earlier. This did the trick, but if it doesn't, you could always use a craft knife to kind of scrape away that raised ink. But really the paper sander should do the trick. I did add a Just a Hello sentiment that I created with the Just a Hello stamp set that I showed you earlier in this video. Include that right on top of our floral image. I also added some gold gemstones here and there to the front. So on this card, we have that white panel where we did the inked impression, where we put the ink on the die and then made the impression. So the ink's in the valleys. Then on the blue note card, we used our cover plate die, and then we also made an impression with it, which allowed the pattern to stand out more. Now, this is one of those cards that has a lot of detail, but for me, the fun is in the detail. You could definitely make this a simple card if you prefer. All right, my last card is my favorite of the techniques because it uses scraps, and I call this a patchwork background. It works great with any background die, but I especially like it with a cover plate that creates a pierced pattern like you see here. For this, I use the new Pinkfresh Studio Intricate Stitched Oval Cover Plate. I love the detail in this one. It's so unique. I use this cover plate on several pieces of cardstock. You could use scraps for this if you prefer. And I ran that through my die cut machine as I would with any die, which cuts, those little piercings. Then I ran it through with the embossing mat, which kind of presses those cuts in place, like I showed you with the last technique. And look at this beautiful pattern we get. I did this on a few different colors of cardstock. I then cut out little strips or areas from the pattern. This was very easy to do with my trimmer. I simply cut out kind of a row of ovals from each of these backgrounds that I could patchwork back together. Of course, there are lots of pieces left over, so I could actually make multiple cards with these backgrounds. Or if you wanted to, you could start with smaller pieces of cardstock, scraps, and use the cover plate on that, and then patchwork those smaller pieces together. So you'll see over there on the left, I have these rows of ovals that I'll patchwork back together on a background. I have a piece of white cardstock cut to 4 by 5 1/4 inches, and I'm covering it with double-sided adhesive. I find this the easiest way to put this background together. So now we have exposed adhesive there, and I can start putting my pieces together to form that patchwork background. Because I cut out even sections from the pattern, when I glue these all together side by side, our pattern will be continuous along the background. This works with a lot of background dies or cover plates, especially those that have a repeating pattern like this one. Now, after I put all the pieces down, I decided I didn't like that yellow. I thought it was a little too bright, so I'm going to carefully pull that away, and I'll add a different color there. I also use my trimmer just to trim everything down nicely, and again, this will end up being 4 by 5 1/4, which is a little bit smaller than our note card, so we'll have a nice white trim around the outside edge. Now for that middle section with exposed adhesive still, I decided to make that pop up, so I just cut a couple of white cardstock scraps to fill in that area and glued those together, stack them for dimension. And then I have a darker peach color piece that I used with that background die, and I'm gluing that strip in the center. I just like that better than the yellow, and I also liked having that raised. So you can make different areas raised if you want to kind of create an eclipse look. All right, now I wanted a focal point, so I used the Pinkfresh Studio Shaker Hearts die set. I cut one of the hearts from white cardstock, and I'm putting it right at the center of our cover plate, and I'll run that through our die cut machine like a regular die. This will cut those little piercing patterns. Then we can use the embossing mat to really press those piercing patterns in and make them stand out even more. I also thought it'd be fun to have a little bit of gold cardstock around that middle section that's kind of raised up. So I cut 2 thin strips of gold cardstock, just some scraps, and I'm gluing those above and below that dark peach color strip in the center. This just gives it a matted look, but honestly, I didn't think I needed the mat before, but changed my mind, so I kind of faked it by doing the strips. Now we can glue our heart to the center along with a sentiment. I wanted to enhance that background a bit, so I cut a bunch of little hearts from coordinating colors of cardstock, and I'm gluing them into the pierce pattern of the background. This is another way to enhance your backgrounds, especially your geometric patterns or repeated patterns. Add little gems or die cuts to the background to really kind of step up the pattern. You could totally skip this, but if you like details like me, it's a fun way to step up that background on a simple card. I also added glossy accents to those little die cuts so they would have some shine to them also. Now you'll notice I changed my mind on the sentiment, and I decided to use a foiled sentiment from the Pinkfresh Studio Celebrating You collection. This has a stamp set, hot foil plate, and coordinating die. I used the hot foil plate and die to create that thinking of you sentiment, and I added it to the center of my card. Now notice that pierced pattern is continuous over all of the cardstock on the background, over the different stripes and the heart. So you have this continuous pierced pattern thanks to this patchwork technique, which works great with regular background dies also. It's a wonderful way to use up your scraps or leftover pieces, but create something extra special. All right, there you have a bunch of different ways to use cover plate dies. I really hope you'll try some of these, and I'll link to a couple other related videos at the end here that you can check out. All of my supplies are linked below in my YouTube description. I really thank you for spending this time with me. Have a wonderful day, and I promise I'll be back very soon with another video. Take care.